I stood at the church doors in my black dress, heart pounding, knowing I was about to destroy the happiest day of my ex-boyfriend's life. But when I saw that bride walking down the aisle, I realized I wasn't just saving him, I was exposing a dangerous web of lies. Before we dive into this shocking story, hit that like button if you're ready for a tale of deception, betrayal, and unexpected justice. And don't forget to subscribe, trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Jasmine, and 6 months ago, I thought I had my life figured out. I was 28, climbing the ladder at a marketing firm in downtown Chicago, living in a cute apartment with my cat, and slowly healing from what I thought was just another failed relationship. You know how it is when you're in your late 20s and everyone around you is getting engaged, married, having babies, and you're just trying to figure out if you even want those things. That was me, except I had just ended a 3-year relationship with someone I genuinely thought might be the one. Daniel was everything you'd want on paper. He was 31, a successful architect with his own firm, the kind of guy who remembered your coffee order and actually listened when you talked about your day. We met at a gallery opening through mutual friends, and for 3 years, we were that couple that everyone else secretly hated because we actually seemed to have our stuff together. We traveled, we laughed, we talked about the future in that careful way people do when they're testing the waters but not quite ready to jump in. The breakup wasn't dramatic or messy. That's what made it so hard. Actually, we sat on his couch on a random Tuesday night in January, and we both just admitted that we wanted different things. He was ready to settle down, buy a house, start thinking about kids. I was still figuring out who I was, still wanted to travel, maybe switch careers, definitely not ready for the white picket fence life. It was mature, it was mutual, and it absolutely broke my heart. But I respected him enough to let him go find someone who wanted the same things he did. So when that cream-colored envelope showed up in my mailbox on a Thursday afternoon in June, my first instinct was to throw it away without opening it. I knew that handwriting. I knew what it was. But curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself staring at the most beautiful wedding invitation I'd ever seen. Daniel Michael Harrison and Victoria Rose Sterling, requesting the honor of my presence at their wedding ceremony, September 15th, the Fairmont Hotel, black tie optional. The photo attached nearly made me drop the invitation. She was stunning, absolutely breathtaking in that effortless way that makes you immediately hate yourself for wearing sweatpants to check the mail. Long blonde hair, perfect smile, wearing what looked like a designer dress in what appeared to be an engagement photo taken at some gorgeous vineyard. Victoria Rose Sterling looked like she belonged on magazine covers, not walking down the aisle to marry my ex-boyfriend. I'll be honest with you, my first reaction was pure jealousy. Not the healthy kind where you wish someone well and move on, but the ugly kind where you start comparing yourself to someone you've never met and finding yourself lacking in every possible way. Had Daniel been looking for someone like this while he was with me? Was I just the practice girlfriend, the one who helped him figure out what he actually wanted? I spent that entire evening stalking Victoria's social media, which only made me feel worse about myself. But then something strange started happening. The more I looked at Victoria's Instagram, her Facebook, her LinkedIn, the more something felt off. Her life looked too perfect, too curated, like she was trying too hard to prove something. Her posts were all about charity events, expensive restaurants, designer handbags, and travels to places that seemed designed to impress rather than genuinely explore. Every caption was generic. Every photo looked like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine rather than someone's actual life. I tried to convince myself that I was just being bitter, that I was looking for reasons to dislike her because I was still processing my own feelings about Daniel moving on so quickly. We'd been broken up for 6 months, and he was already getting married. That had to sting, right? But the more I tried to talk myself out of it, the more that nagging feeling in my stomach grew stronger. Something about Victoria Sterling didn't add up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen her somewhere before, but not as Victoria. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to that wedding, not to cause drama, not to win Daniel back, but because something deep in my gut was telling me that there was more to this story, and I needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. I wish I could tell you that I'm the type of person who normally goes down internet rabbit holes at 2 in the morning. But that's exactly what I found myself doing 3 days after receiving that wedding invitation. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus at work, Couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's face and why it felt so familiar. Have you ever had that feeling where something is right on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't quite grasp it? That's where I was living, and it was driving me absolutely insane. I started with basic searches, the kind any curious ex-girlfriend might do. Victoria Sterling, Chicago. Victoria Sterling, architect. Victoria Sterling, charity work. But the deeper I dug, the more inconsistent things became. Her LinkedIn said she worked at a nonprofit, but when I called the organization, they'd never heard of her. Her Facebook showed her at a conference in Miami in March, but her Instagram had her skiing in Colorado on the same exact dates. Little things that individually meant nothing, but together started painting a picture that made my skin crawl. Then it hit me like a freight train. I was listening to my favorite true crime podcast during my morning run, and the host mentioned a case about a woman who targeted wealthy men through elaborate cons. The name she used was Vanessa Chen. And when they described her, my blood ran cold. Mid-20s, blonde hair, stunning, with a talent for reinventing herself to match whatever her target wanted. The similarities were too strong to ignore, but I needed to be sure. I spent my lunch break that day in my car, frantically searching for photos of Vanessa Chen. When I finally found them buried in a news article from 2 years ago, my hands started shaking. The bone structure was identical, the eyes were the same, but the hair color was different, and she looked slightly younger. Victoria Sterling and Vanessa Chen were the same person. I was sure of it. But how could I prove it? And more importantly, how could I convince anyone else? That evening, I called my friend Carmen, who works as a private investigator. Carmen and I went to college together. And she's one of those people who can find out anything about anyone if you give her enough time and coffee. I tried to explain the situation without sounding like a jealous ex who'd lost her mind. But Carmen could hear the panic in my voice. She agreed to do some digging, but warned me that if I was wrong, this could backfire spectacularly. What Carmen uncovered over the next week made my worst fears look like child's play. Victoria Sterling didn't exist before 18 months ago. Every single document, every reference, every trace of her life before that point had been carefully manufactured. But Vanessa Chen had a very real and very disturbing history. She'd been involved in at least 3 separate cons, each targeting successful men who had both money and social connections. The pattern was always the same. She'd research her target extensively, transform herself into exactly what they were looking for, and then move fast to gain access to their finances and social circles. The engagements were always short, the access to money was always immediate, and she always disappeared right before anyone could figure out what was happening. One of her previous victims, a businessman named Richard, had lost over $300,000 and his entire business after she gained access to his accounts and investor contacts. Carmen managed to track down Richard, and when I heard his story, I felt sick. The way he described meeting Vanessa, how perfect she seemed, how quickly she'd integrated into his life. It was like he was describing Daniel's relationship with Victoria, word for word. Richard had been so devastated by the betrayal that he'd considered suicide. His family had been destroyed, his reputation ruined, and he was still rebuilding his life 2 years later. I had the evidence. I had the proof, but I also had a massive problem. Daniel wouldn't take my calls. When I tried to reach out to his family, they dismissed me as a bitter ex-girlfriend who couldn't handle him moving on. His best friend actually hung up on me when I tried to explain what I'd discovered. Everyone thought I was jealous, desperate, maybe even a little unhinged. The wedding was in 3 days, and I was the only person who knew that Daniel was about to marry a woman who would destroy his life. I had to make a choice that would either save him or make me look like the most vindictive ex-girlfriend in history. I was going to crash that wedding. The morning of September 15th dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect fall day that makes you believe in fairy tales and happy endings. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection in the black dress I'd chosen specifically because it felt like armor. My hands were shaking as I applied my lipstick, and I kept rehearsing what I was going to say, how I was going to present the evidence, how I was going to convince a room full of people that I wasn't just a crazy ex-girlfriend having a breakdown. The Fairmont Hotel was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. White roses everywhere, string quartet playing softly in the background, guests in designer outfits sipping champagne and laughing like they were at the social event of the season. I'd never felt more out of place in my life, but I forced myself to blend in, to smile at strangers, to act like I belonged there. Carmen had positioned herself near the back with a camera, ready to document everything, and Richard had flown in from Boston, sitting quietly in the last row with the evidence we'd compiled. When the music changed and the procession began, my heart started pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Daniel looked handsome and happy, genuinely glowing with the kind of joy that made my chest ache because I remembered when he used to look at me like that. His family was beaming, his friends were grinning, and everyone was holding their breath for the moment when the bride would appear. And then Victoria walked down that aisle, and I have to admit, she was absolutely breathtaking. Her dress was a work of art, her makeup was flawless, and she moved with the kind of confidence that made you believe she deserved every beautiful thing in the world. For a split second, I almost lost my nerve. What if I was wrong? What if I was about to destroy the happiness of two people who genuinely loved each other? What if I really was just the bitter ex who couldn't let go? But then I caught her eye as she passed my row, and something cold flickered across her face before she smiled again. That look lasted maybe half a second, but it was enough to remind me why I was there. This wasn't about me and Daniel. This was about stopping someone from destroying a good man's life. The ceremony felt like it lasted forever and no time at all. I barely heard the vows, couldn't focus on the readings, just kept waiting for that moment when the officiant would ask if anyone had objections. When it finally came, the church fell silent, and I knew this was it. This was the moment that would either save Daniel or ruin my reputation forever. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like jelly, and said in the clearest voice I could manage, "I object." The gasps were immediate and sharp, like the entire room had been slapped. Daniel's face went from confusion to anger in about 2 seconds, and I could see Victoria's mask slip for just an instant before she composed herself. "Jasmine, what are you doing?" Daniel's voice was tight with embarrassment and fury, but I'd come too far to back down now. I pulled out the folder Carmen had prepared, my hand steadier now that I'd committed to this path. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but everyone in this room needs to know who they're really celebrating today," I said, walking toward the altar. "The woman standing next to Daniel isn't Victoria Sterling. Her real name is Vanessa Chen, and she's a convicted con artist who specializes in targeting wealthy men." The explosion of voices was immediate. Victoria's face went white, then red, then calculating. "This is insane," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Daniel, your ex-girlfriend is having some kind of breakdown. Security needs to remove her, immediately." But Richard was already standing up, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd lived through hell. "She's telling the truth," he said quietly. "That woman destroyed my life 2 years ago. She took everything I had and disappeared in the night." The room erupted. Daniel looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. And for the first time since I'd started this investigation, I saw her real face. It was cold, calculating, and absolutely furious at being caught. The chaos that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Victoria, or Vanessa, whatever her real name was, tried to run the moment she realized her con was completely exposed. She hiked up her designer wedding dress and made a break for the side exit, but hotel security was already moving. Carmen had called ahead and explained the situation, and they were ready for exactly this scenario. Watching her get stopped in that beautiful white gown, mascara running down her face as she screamed about false accusations, was both satisfying and deeply sad. The police arrived within minutes, and I watched as they cuffed her right there in the hotel lobby while wedding guests stared in shock. She kept trying to maintain her innocence, claiming this was all some elaborate scheme by a jealous ex-girlfriend, but when they read the charges related to her previous cons, even she seemed to realize the game was over. Richard's testimony, combined with the financial evidence Carmen had gathered, made it clear that this wasn't just about stopping a wedding anymore. This was about justice for multiple victims. Daniel was devastated in a way that broke my heart all over again. He sat in one of the hotel's conference rooms afterward, still in his tuxedo, looking like someone had just told him everything he believed about the world was a lie. His family surrounded him, alternating between comforting him and apologizing to me for not believing my warnings. His mother actually hugged me with tears in her eyes, saying she was sorry they'd dismissed me as just a bitter ex. When Daniel and I finally talked alone, the conversation was unlike anything we'd ever had. He thanked me, but I could see the humiliation in his eyes, the way this had shattered his confidence in his own judgment. How did you know? He asked quietly. How did you see what I couldn't? I tried to explain about the inconsistencies, the nagging feeling, the research, but the truth was simpler than that. I knew him. I knew the kind of person he was, and Victoria had been performing a version of what she thought he wanted, rather than actually connecting with who he was. The aftermath played out over the following months. Like a slow-motion movie, Victoria was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes across multiple states. The investigation revealed she'd stolen over $1 million from various victims over the past decade. Daniel's bank accounts were frozen temporarily while they sorted out what money she'd already accessed. But fortunately, her timeline hadn't allowed her to do the kind of damage she'd inflicted on others. Daniel went through what I can only describe as a complete emotional breakdown and rebuild. He started therapy, took a sabbatical from work, and really examined how he'd been so completely fooled. We stayed in touch, but not in the way you might expect. We didn't get back together, and honestly, neither of us wanted that. What we'd been through had changed us both too much to simply rewind to where we were before. What I learned from this whole experience was something I'll carry with me forever. Sometimes the most uncomfortable thing you can do is also the most necessary. Sometimes speaking up when everyone thinks you're wrong is the most important thing you can do. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be polite, trying not to rock the boat, trying to avoid being seen as difficult or dramatic, but in that moment, standing up in that church, I realized that some situations required you to be willing to look like the villain in order to prevent real harm. The strangest part is that I don't regret any of it. Even though it turned my life upside down for months, Daniel is doing better now, rebuilding his life with a healthier perspective on relationships and trust. I've learned to trust my instincts even when they lead me into uncomfortable territory. And somewhere out there, Victoria is paying for the pain she caused, which feels like justice, even if it doesn't undo the damage. Sometimes the person who ruins your perfect day is actually saving your entire future. Sometimes being the one who speaks up when everyone else stays silent is exactly what the world needs, even if it's the hardest thing you've ever done. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't give you the ending you expected, but it gives you something better, the knowledge that you were brave enough to act when it mattered most. So here I am, telling you this story almost a year later, and I'm still processing everything that happened. Some nights I lie awake wondering what would have happened if I'd just thrown that wedding invitation away. If I'd convinced myself that nagging feeling was just jealousy. If I'd chosen to mind my own business like everyone expected me to. Would Daniel have figured it out eventually? Would Victoria have disappeared with his money and left him devastated? Would other men have fallen victim to her because I stayed silent? I'll never know for sure, but I sleep better at night knowing I trusted my instincts when it mattered most. But I want to know what you think about all this. Put yourself in my shoes for a minute. You get that wedding invitation from your ex. You start noticing things that don't add up about his new fiancée. You discover she's actually a con artist who's destroyed other people's lives. What would you have done? Would you have crashed that wedding like I did, knowing you might look like the crazy ex-girlfriend who couldn't let go? Or would you have let your ex learn the hard way, figuring it wasn't your responsibility to save him from his own mistakes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I'm genuinely curious how other people would have handled this situation. If this story kept you glued to your screen, if you found yourself holding your breath during that wedding scene, if you felt even a fraction of the anxiety I felt standing up in that church, then do me a favor and smash that like button. Stories like this don't just entertain us. They remind us about the importance of trusting our gut feelings and speaking up when something feels wrong, even when it's uncomfortable, even when everyone thinks we're overreacting, even when we risk looking foolish or vindictive. And listen, if you want to hear more stories about real people making impossible choices, about karma catching up with people who think they're untouchable, about the messy, complicated ways that justice sometimes works in the real world, then hit that subscribe button right now, because life is stranger than fiction, and the stories that happen to ordinary people like you and me are often the most extraordinary ones of all. Remember, sometimes the person who disrupts your perfect moment is actually the one protecting your future. Sometimes being uncomfortable, being the one who speaks up, being willing to look like the bad guy is exactly what someone needs, even if they don't realize it at the time. Trust your instincts, even when they lead you into territory that scares you. And never underestimate the power of one person willing to stand up and tell the truth, even when it's the hardest thing they've ever done. The world needs more people who are willing to be brave when it matters most. Be that person. Your future self, and maybe someone else's future self, will thank you for it.